Okay, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm normally solo on Friday, but along with bringing the flu with me, I'm bringing Steven Ruiz, who is clearly better than the flu. Steven, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I hope I don't get infected through the Zoom here.
Yeah, exactly. That hopefully that's not the case. I did study epidemiology when I was younger, and I think we're safe here. But yeah, I'm playing a little injured today. But I couldn't help but kind of, honestly, I've always been intrigued by what you do, and you've been one of the a unique voice in the space ever since you were back with like For the Win and other, and now you're with the Ringer. You get to work with my former colleague Austin Gale, who for my money is the best person that's ever worked at PFF, and I'm frankly jealous that you get to work with him now. Obviously, Benjamin Solak, Shael, a lot of people there who are fantastic, and obviously you contribute there in incredible ways. Steven, tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and your path.
Well, I went to school for journalism, and when I got to school, I thought I was going to write about baseball. So this was a long time ago. I don't even watch baseball anymore, but I think it was like Cam Newton that got me really into X's and O's, just because the Panthers had drafted him. I was a Panthers fan long before Cam Newton was drafted. They were running the zone read, and I didn't know how it worked, so I started to learn how it worked. And once I did that, it kind of like set me down this path. And like 10 years later, I'm writing about the sport for a living. It kind of just worked out that way.
Got it. So you were a Panthers fan. Cam Newton comes into the fray. By the way, Cam Newton, for my money, the best college football season that anybody's ever had in the history of college football. Is that in dispute? Because his Auburn team, you win a college football playoff national championship. None of his other offensive players were drafted, right? Or is it something like that, or none of them started a game in the NFL or something?
It was, yeah, didn't play a snap or something like that, but it wasn't a good offense. There were some good players on the defense, but yeah, it was very impressive. And I think when you add in like that narrative, I think it is the best quarterback season.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Ndamukong Suh in Nebraska while I was there had one of those seasons that was insane. Charles Woodson, obviously, and Travis Hunter, I think it's gotten spoiled a little bit by his injury, but was on pace, I think, to have a decent shot there. And so you've gotten into a little bit of some conversations about your sort of chief, one of your big projects at the Ringer, and I'm going to pull this up a little bit because I do want. For context, people to sort of look at this a little bit. This is the Ringers page, which, by the way, whoever does your graphic design is also really good. But this is your quarterback ranking, and unlike some places, like Pro Football Focus and things like that, for one, they have Patrick Mahomes first, followed by Josh Allen, Justin Herbert. Not a ton that you can dispute there. But you go about it a little bit differently, right? Can you tell people sort of the way in which you go about ranking these quarterbacks? Because it's going to be a little bit different than somebody like a Pro Football Focus would, for example.
Yeah, I started this process probably I think it was 2015 was the first year I did it in this manner, where I gave each quarterback a grade in 6 different categories. And the categories have changed, and how I kind of weighted those grades has changed over the years as I've my philosophy on quarterback evaluation has changed. But right now it's basically you're graded on timing, accuracy, pocket presence, arm talent, and decision making. And I kind of set it up, and creativity. I forgot that one, but I kind of set it up where it's like a streamlined process, because that's how we think about quarterbacking, where the first attribute is pocket presence, because that's the first thing you do. You catch the ball, and then you have to be poised in the pocket. And then the second thing is decision making. What do you do next? And then kind of the opposite of decision making for me is creativity and timing. Those two things kind of work against each other, where I think you give a quarterback like Kirk Cousins or even Brock Purdy a lot of credit for playing on time and running the offense as it's supposed to be run. And then there's a quarterback like Justin Fields, who doesn't really run the offense like that, but he does bring something to the offense because he creates offense outside of structure. So I thought that was a good way to give both of those guys credit. And then it goes to the throw itself, accuracy, getting the ball on target, arm talent, getting the ball there. And those, I think that makes up the process, the quarterback process, as I see it. And I think I don't think it's a perfect way of analyzing quarterbacks, but I think it's the best way that I'm capable of doing it. And that's why I do it this way.
When I think like where you're at is probably closer to, what my boss Thomas Dimitrov would do as a scout, right? Where it's like you're kind of trying to divorce and places like Pro Football Focus, which I have a lot of admiration for. I worked there for 7 years. Like it, they're trying to do it with the play-by-play grading. You're trying to divorce from the quarterback the circumstances that the quarterback's in, which I think can oftentimes lead you to conclusions that people don't agree with. The one thing that I do want to bring up, by the way, though, and this is true of about both what you're trying to do and what Pro Football Focus is trying to do, is you don't know the play, right? But football, if you've watched enough football, and granted, I know football fairly well. I don't know it as well as you can basically discern in most plays what's supposed to happen on a play. And I think that was always one of the digs that was unfair towards Pro Football Focus. That would be a dig against you if it were valid. But can you kind of explain that too? Like you've watched enough football, and all the graders of Pro Football Focus have watched enough football, where like that is not you kind of know what a quarterback is supposed to do on a play, more or less, and then you have enough lead connections where you can ask somebody and be like, hey, I'm not quite sure about this play. Can you give me an idea of what the quarterback's thinking here in the case where it's borderline?
Yeah, I think like 95% of the time that's not an issue, and that 5% it does become an issue. But I think there's always going to be bad data in any sample size. I feel like that kind of confounds things, but I don't think it is an issue. And I always like defended PFF when people said that. I don't defend PFF often, but that was one of the things where I was like, you pretty much know, like if a team's running cover 3, there are variations of cover 3, but there are only so many, and there are resources all over the internet to figure it out. And you can kind of watch the play and compare the notes that you're in your research and figure out what they're doing. And of course, there's always going to be little like deviations, but I've never felt like that was an issue for anybody, like kind of diagnosing plays. I don't know. I don't think it's that big of a deal with player evaluation, unless it's like something foundational to the offense. Like a good example would be a pass rusher, an edge rusher specifically, who is asked to play the run a little bit differently. So their pass rushing stats don't always look that good. There was a couple guys out of LSU a couple years ago that had that effect. I think that is when it becomes an issue. But like with NFL quarterbacks, more or less, they're all running the same type of offense.
Well, yeah, that was always like the Donnell Hunter thing where he didn't have a ton of pressures. And then, even Trayvon Walker was sort of thought of as the Donnell Hunter, right, where he's asked to like stack and shed maybe a little bit too much.
Right. Yeah.
And he's not putting up a ton of pass rush numbers, but clearly helping the defense there. I think that's a really good point. I think where I want to bake this into is where the deviations are going to be between you, where you're evaluating. And I would also and I say this in a complimentary way, and like traditional scouting methods are going to look at a player versus something like PFF, and again, I don't want to make it completely PFF, something like completion percentage over expected, which is a metric that I think is valuable, but I think it misses something in exactly what you just said, which is being able to see what the expectation is and understand where the quarterback is meeting or exceeding or not exceeding those expectations. And where does that cutoff start? So I think about a thing like CPOE, right? Where there was that play against Vegas 3 years ago where Patrick Mahomes is like moving the pocket and looking one way, and the whole defense shifts, and he throws across his body to Travis Kelce for a wide open touchdown to win the game. And like from the point of view of accuracy, that play is trivial. It's easy to throw that pass to Travis Kelce, but everything that comes before it, right, is the quarterback's creativity and all the stuff that goes into playing the position that something like CPOE may or may not capture because it's baking into the expectation the stuff that the quarterback is also responsible for. So that over expectation metric is actually dinging him because he's creating a better expectation for himself. Conversely, the same thing's true about PFF. A lot of times they'll grade the accuracy, but it's sort of like, well, did you put yourself in a position to have to make a pinpoint throw over the middle of the field because you didn't have great pocket awareness or weren't on time and all that stuff? And so you might get a good grade in that system, but somebody like you might look at it and say, well, actually, like, awesome throw you made, but if you were just a little bit better of a quarterback, you wouldn't even have to make that throw.
Yeah, I think when I look at how I grade these quarterbacks and kind of how they stack up when you look at like the EPA leaderboard, for instance, I think the biggest difference comes in the creativity, arm talent, and pocket presence grades. because like timing, accuracy, and decision making, and even arm talent a little bit can be judged with numbers. Like you could decision making, we have turnover worthy play rate. Accuracy, that's self-explanatory. Timing, we have like time to throw and other stats that measure that. But like pocket presence is one that I think that stats have never really been able to capture because they're measuring the wrong thing. Like we look at like, I know a big discussion last year with Jalen Hurts. I was saying that he wasn't so good in the pocket, but the numbers were saying, oh no, he's like the best quarterback in the pocket. But the issue there is he's only staying in the pocket under ideal conditions. Like he has a clean pocket and there's someone wide open. His first read is wide open. So of course he's going to look good. But if he's bailing out of the pocket at the first sign of pressure or when his first read's not open, those plays aren't going to get counted by the in-pocket stat. So I think like those three categories are where I deviate the most. And I think that explains why a player like Tua or Brock, who get by on timing and accuracy, don't really rank well in my rankings.
Yeah, and so let's just cut to the chase on that because obviously, I have problems with grading systems that don't have Patrick Mahomes first. I'm going to be honest with you. I watch him every single week. I think he overcomes a ton. I think we see it all this year with Travis being hurt, and then like you're dealing with Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Sky Moore, and Kadarius Toney as your top three wideouts, and he's still winning football games. I still think, there's a lot to it. Justin Herbert is a guy that you and I have talked about privately, where I'm like, I worry about the production in that offense, and yet I can see unmistakably that he's talented and that he has a ton going for him. And even to a certain degree, you can see where his processing is terrific. But then you get down to these base cases, right? And you get down to these base cases of Brock Purdy and Tua Tagovailoa, where they're very clearly executing an offense well. And I think what your grading scheme is trying to do is say, yes, that's true. However, we know that it's almost impossible to ensure that an offense is going to be this well formulated all the time. And so would you rather have a quarterback that is impervious to many of these things and maybe is playing in a system that doesn't allow him to put up those kind of stats versus a guy who in a perfect situation is putting up those kind of stats? And that's where I think like something like your grading system would be more stable, but maybe there are going to be seasons where you're going to have, for lack of a better phrase, egg on your face because a guy like Purdy is going to put up a ton of numbers in a system that allows him to do so.
Yeah, that's the thing I always say. The rankings are about how these quarterbacks would perform if you dropped them in a vacuum, and not the Kyle Shanahan offense suitability rankings or the Mike McDaniel suitability rankings. And I think another thing that happens with those guys is, and I'm not trying to like disparage them, but I'm going to say the guys that are less talented than the elite guys, the guys we think of at the top of the league, I feel like the things that they are good at, like for instance with Tua, timing and accuracy, get embellished in comparison to the other guys at the top of the league. Yes, Tua gets by on accuracy and timing, but his accuracy and timing is no better than, I would say, like, I'm trying not to get in trouble. I was going to say Mac Jones. I'm not going to say Mac Jones. That's too bad of a comparison right now. But like, it's not better than Justin Herbert's.
Yeah.
It doesn't even compare, in my opinion, when I watch the film.
Yeah, I mean, and that you say embellished in the sense of like we not only is Tua accurate and has great timing, but those things get overrated even in an offense like that. I mean, I can see that. Right? I mean, like Tyreek Hill is so fast, right? In the sense that like he's so athletic and so good at route running and all this stuff. He's never not going to be there, right? So even if like there are going to be plays that in a normal offense, somebody like MVS is going to run a route to the wrong landmark and it's going to look bad. That happens more rarely with a guy like Tyreek Hill.
Right.
And so even if Tua is good at that, a rating system like PFFs or CPOE or something like that is going to say it's even better than it really is. Is that what you're basically saying?
Yeah, I think it's easier to be accurate when you're throwing to open guys. I don't think that's like a crazy concept. I think it's a very intuitive concept. If someone is right, like a step behind your receiver, you kind of throw it out in front away from the coverage, which now your margin for error isn't as big. And I really think like deep accuracy in particular isn't a quarterback stat at all. Like when you think about like a go ball, the quarterback just throws it up if the receiver runs the wrong route and tracks it wrong, it goes down as an inaccurate throw. If they track it really well and adjust to the ball and the cornerback doesn't, it's tracked as an accurate throw. It really has nothing to do with the quarterback. I think deep ball accuracy for quarterbacks is more about timing, like when you threw the ball, how high you put it up, like did you give your receiver a chance? So I think like when we talk about like Tua's accuracy, I think even then it gets a little bit overrated. And then the processing thing, it's hard to find just because Mike McDaniel is so good, but there are examples when Tua will like try to look off a safety or try to like do something with his eyes and then come back to the guy he actually wants to throw to, and that guy is covered and he throws it anyway. When I see those plays over and over again, I'm thinking, are we giving him too much credit for processing, or is he really just like guessing and not confirming after the snap? And there's a big difference between those two things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I to your point, it's funny because you said something that I talked about on the podcast on Wednesday with Thomas, which is like, how much are these like elite play callers? How much do they select for that type of like lack of creativity is a wrong word, but like I think of Kyle Shanahan, who's wonderful. Like there's nothing bad I can say about it, but they did pass on Patrick Mahomes for Solomon Thomas in 2017, and they reportedly wanted to trade a second-round pick for Kirk Cousins. That has seemed to be his golden boy, right? And then there's Jimmy G, and then there's Trey Lance. They never really gave much of a chance to. Now Purdy, he does have a type, right? I call him like color between the lines guys, right? Where I think like what you're looking for more in a quarterback is an artist, right? You're looking for a guy like Mahomes, a guy like Herbert. And Herbert's less of an artist than Mahomes, but he's very good. And Josh Allen is kind of like the Picasso of the quarterback. He's like not quite
Jackson Pollock. He's Jackson Pollock.
Yeah, and so I think so if there is a dig on those kind of play callers, is that it's that they prefer those quarterbacks that wouldn't necessarily rate as well in your system, maybe the Jared Goffs of the world. And it is funny and it is illustrative to say when Sean McVay kind of got fed up with Jared Goff, another guy you and I have had disagreements about, he went for the artist and the artist won him a Super Bowl. And even though Goff has performed, I think, pretty well over the last couple of years, it is illustrating to say when Kyle Shanahan did give up all the resources for a quarterback, it was the artist type and not the color between the lines type. So I think you're on the right path as far as like what you're valuing at the QB position. I think the question is when you look at a guy like Tom Brady, who, you watch Tom Brady's early years, it was defense, it was special teams, it was good offensive lines, good running games, Corey Dillon, all of those things. And Brady was driving the car. You get to 2007, you start to see like really his potential with the great offense. And that's kind of what Purdy's doing now with Moss, Welker, Dante Stallworth, all those guys. And then by the time Brady retired, he really was like the everything everywhere all at once quarterback. Like he truly was. Do you ever, how quick, and that was over a 20-year career, mind you. So how quick would you be to, if Brock Purdy was given the opportunity to have a 20-year career with a brilliant coach, the same way Tom was, and to a large extent with Josh McDaniel, because he was there for huge stretches of that time. How likely would you be to be able to move off of that spot? Can somebody grow into that role from a kind of a driver of the car to the whole car?
I think so, because like you said, we saw Tom Brady do it. And are you asking like, would I change my viewpoint on how I evaluate these quarterbacks if that did happen? Like, would Brock make me change how I do it?
I just think I don't think it changes how you do it, right? Because I think that you would rank Brady 2 years ago like a top 3 quarterback. I mean,
right, yeah.
But my question is, and this is where the analytics I think get in real difficult spots. And being an analytics person and one of the a person with a name and a voice in this area, I oftentimes get these replies like, "Wait, you say this about Kirk Cousins, but PFF grades him this way," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really take a 3-game sample size as gospel. I'm sorry, right?" And so I think analytics fluctuates too much because it takes it overweighs what has just happened. Yeah. Whereas I think the risk I think that you run in your analysis is being too slow to move off a player and move off an opinion. And when I and I admire you guys a lot. You know, you, Derek, you know, Nate, like all these people. I watch film and I watch. You know, I look for you guys for ideas for my work. I sometimes wonder though, is your evaluation of those players, is it something that's inherent to the player too much? Can it move? Can it change? And do you worry at all that it changes too slowly sometimes?
No, I don't. And I say that having been wrong a bunch in the past and changing my opinion immediately. Like, I didn't like Justin Herbert before the draft. I saw him play against the Tampa Bay Bucks in like his second or first start. I forget which one it was. And I was like, okay, I was wrong. This guy's freaking amazing. I saw Patrick Mahomes start that. I didn't like Patrick Mahomes. I very famously gave him a C minus. I gave the Chiefs a C minus for drafting him. It gets thrown in my face all the time whenever I talk bad about a quarterback. I saw him against the Broncos in that Week 17 game, his rookie year, and I was like, okay, I was wrong because this looks amazing and this looks like something I've never seen before. And I think like my philosophy on how quarterbacks succeed has changed over the years. Like when I was doing the rankings in 2015, I put way too much emphasis on one, like how poised the quarterback was in the pocket and like how technically sound he was and like going through his reads. I think I overweighted that. And looking back on my process, I was like, okay, I'm giving these guys too much credit. I'm giving Josh Rosen too much credit. And I'm not giving Patrick Mahomes enough credit. Where's the disconnect there? And I think what I eventually landed on and what I eventually realized is like whenever I get these guys wrong, it's when I bet against talent. So to answer your question, the reason why I think I move a little bit slower is because I do believe in talent and I do like betting on talent. And that's one thing that doesn't change overnight. I think in the case of Tom Brady, it did change, but that took a lot of time. It took a change in his diet. It took a change in his mechanics with Tom House. So I think that's the exception to the rule personally. And it came at a time before the 2011 CBA when development was just different. It just was.
Yeah, I mean, you make such a good point, and like, I call the NFL right now a potato chip league in the sense of like you're done with one bag and you just open up another small bag because there's not that. I think back to like Tony Romo, right? Why did Tony Romo become a great quarterback? Well, it's because the Dallas Cowboys had Drew Bledsoe, who was old. They had Drew Henson, who they thought was their future, and then they had Tony Romo stashed because you had a third quarterback. It also cost a ton to actually draft a quarterback in the first 3 or 4 picks. So there was actually incentive to develop these QBs, and so there was truly the ability for a quarterback to develop, and not to mention the fact that Brady was himself a 6th-round pick and a third string guy himself. I agree with you 100%. I do think, and I've tested in, I do think it leads you astray sometimes because I have talked to scouts who will like I've talked to scouts who still think Frank Clark's a blue chip player, and like I'm gonna be honest with you, I've blocked I've played the game a little bit. I've blocked edge players. Frank Clark is not good anymore, and I don't care what grade you put on him 3 years ago. And I don't care how many sacks he gets in the playoffs. That being said, I do think your approach is good in the sense that when you look at things like PFF WAR, which I created, and things like CPOE and all that stuff, if you look at the year-to-year correlations, they're generally good, but when you change teams, they're not as good. And I think when you're trying to uncover is, if I were to change teams with a player, how much better would he be, or how much worse would he be? And that's a hard problem and a problem that you do need to have, I think, some subjectivity to. So I think this has been a great discussion. I think this is a way, like I said, I've admired the work that you've done. And obviously, while I don't agree with necessarily all of your rankings, I do think that the process deserves an explanation in a good way. And its contrast with what we're trying to do, I think deserves an explanation. Even if, again, when I watch like somebody like Jared Goff, I tend to see some positives that maybe you don't see. I can understand why you think he's limited. I also think he's improved and he has jumped up your rankings as a result. So maybe me calling your rankings slow moving is maybe a little bit too much. I'm actually going to take some questions from the crowd now. My former intern Arjun Menon says this is clickbait. I don't agree with that, Arjun, but have fun in Ann Arbor this weekend. Here's Sean, who's one of our frequent listeners. He says, for Steven, how much do you weigh the ability to avoid negative plays and lift the floor of an offense? Do you think this captures that aspect of QB play well?
I weigh that heavily. I wonder like how you define avoiding negative plays. Like I think sack evasion is like one of the most important traits for a quarterback when I evaluate quarterbacks, especially like quarterbacks coming into the league. Like one of the reasons why I liked Anthony Richardson so much wasn't necessarily his combine performance or his big arm. It was that he was so damn good at Florida behind a not great offensive line at avoiding sacks. And that's like something you rarely see. So I think like guys like Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert, guys who have been called overrated in my rankings over the past, have gotten that boost because of their ability to avoid those negative plays. But those are just sacks. If you're talking about like Kirk Cousins avoiding a negative play by checking it down on third down instead of like forcing it down the field, like I don't give credit to quarterbacks for that. And I'm exaggerating with that example. There are like other positive ways that quarterbacks do that I probably don't give enough credit to, like a Brock Purdy, for instance. But yeah, there's always going to be flaws in the process.
Yeah, here's I'm just going to plug our website a little bit here, sumersports.com. We do have sack percentage here. What's interesting, Steve, is that Baker Mayfield was like fourth worst last year, and now he's first. I do think that will regress, but for the most part, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, those kind of players are always going to be at the top there. When I was at PFF, we used to do negatively graded throws, which again is a little bit janky, and that like, there's survivorship bias in a lot of these things. There's survivorship bias in a lot of what we do. But I do think that is one place where analytics and film, I think, merge, is that if you just look at pressure to sack ratio, it does a pretty good job of ordering who the good quarterbacks are going to be and how they are impervious over time. Let's get a couple more questions before we let you go. How good a physically limited pocket passer has to be in order to be better than the Allens and the Burrows is a difficult question. I'm not sure has an answer. That's just a comment, but I think that's kind of like down the line with what we're talking about here. Like we talked about Burrow, I think privately the other day, which is like when a guy's, it's not just team, it's also physical. Like Herbert's dealt with, I think people underestimated how hurt Justin Herbert was last year in his rib cage after the Chiefs game in week 2. And the fact that he was able even to get that team to the playoffs with that was positive. Josh Allen obviously had the arm. Patrick has been basically injured in big key spots for most of his career and has still won Super Bowls. Whereas Joe Burrow with the calf almost killed the season here for the Bengals because he doesn't have those physical gifts. He's sort of on the edge of viability with that regard. Like that's another part of this that you're trying to judge too, right?
Yeah, I thought Burrow's injury, I didn't think it would have that big of an impact on him because I didn't fully agree with the people that were saying like he's going to be fine no matter what, like when he gets old, just because his game translates. Because I do think he relies on his mobility more than people realize. But I didn't think it was going to look like that, where he could barely throw downfield. And I think that was, like you said, that's a good example of it. But to answer or to respond to the person's comment, with Josh Allen, I think it is really hard because Josh Allen does not play a normal brand of football, and it's really hard to quantify that. And I think I've underrated him in the past in my rankings just because a grading system that's supposed to be for a normal quarterback doesn't apply to him. But like Justin Herbert, he might be like the best pocket passer in the NFL. So I don't even know how someone would be able to pass him without the tools that he has. Like Justin Herbert, the reason why he's so good is because he processes so quickly. He avoids sacks in the pocket and he pushes the ball downfield still. I don't know any other quarterback in the league that can do that without those physical traits.
One question, and before we get to our last question, that I do have, because this is my only dig on Herbert, and maybe this is just me being like a Kansas City Chiefs fan here, with my San Diego Chargers, dislike. But do you ever wonder if Justin Herbert processes the game too fast? Like, do you think he's too quick? I every once in a while, and it came up in the Miami game in week 1 where he had that intentional grounding, and I'm just like, I know it wasn't there. Like the throw, whatever he was looking at his first read or second read. Do you ever wonder sometimes if that offense could even be better if he actually did throw the plays that weren't there? Because I do think he's got that kind of arm talent. And sometimes I wonder if he processes the game. Sounds weird. It's like Peter Griffin like to say this, but he processes the game too fast.
Yeah, that's something I've criticized him for. Like, I do criticize Justin Herbert. If you click on the blurb in the rankings, I do have a weakness for Justin Herbert, and it's always been creativity to me. But I do think, like, since the second half of last year, he's kind of turned the dial up a little bit. And we've kind of seen that slowly but surely improve. And I think early on this year, especially since he's put the shooter sleeve on, I don't know if you've noticed that,
Yeah.
but since week 2, he's been wearing it. And he's been scrambling this year. As soon as he sees 2-man, he's out of the pocket. So I think that's starting to change. His grade has gone up a little bit, but that's always been his weakness to me. I just think we're grasping at straws when we find a weakness in his game, because everything is so well-rounded, everything is so sharpened. But I do agree, like, if there is one thing that's separating him from Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, it's that ability to go off script.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, how much of a bag fumble the Oregon coaching staff. I mean, I remember I back when I bet, like, I had this huge bet on Oregon against Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl his last year, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, either this guy sucks or this coaching staff is the worst coaching staff I've ever. And they won and covered, so I was happy. But watching that game, it was such a grind. And now watching him with the Chargers, it's like it didn't have to be that hard, and yet the Chargers still find a way sometimes to make it that hard. One last question here, and I like this one a lot. With the massive differences between the NFL and college game, offensively, what are the top traits you think translate Saturdays into Sundays? I'm assuming you're going to say sack avoidance is the big one, but what are some other ones?
Yeah, this is a question that I've been thinking about for the last couple of years. Like, I've been thinking about it a lot. Processing to me is the most overrated thing in college prospect evaluation. I like to say we're post-processing now. Like, the guy that can go 1 to 2 to 3 in the pocket. Like, I don't care if you can do that when you're 21 years old. I'm assuming that every quarterback that starts and plays is going to be able to do that by the time they reach their prime in the NFL. So I want to see talent. I think arm talent, sack avoidance, mobility, creativity under pressure, those things are the most important. And of course, like, accuracy, like being able to throw the ball to your target. I think sometimes we kind of overlook that. Like, I think a lot of my friends really were high on Desmond Ridder because he did do that stuff where he went 1 to 2 to 3 and he called out protections. He did all, like, the nerdy stuff that you want to see on film. But the guy couldn't throw the ball to the receiver. And I think if you can't do that, it's going to be hard to do it in the NFL. And as we've seen, he's had a hard time doing that in the NFL.
Yeah. And Ridder it was hard because of the quality of competition. Like the one game he got to play Alabama, it was like 20% of his dropbacks were either sacks or batted balls, and you're like, that's going to be a little bit, from a speed of the game standpoint, going to be a red flag for me. And not that Ridder can't be a quality NFL starter, but it looks not promising. Justin Fields was one, right, where sack avoidance was not there, whereas accuracy was. My colleague here at Sumer Taste, Seth, obviously wrote about that, where he was one of the most accurate quarterbacks. And so it's just kind of an amalgam of all those things where it's not just one thing, which is why it's hard, and which is why I think I respect the endeavor you're doing greatly. And every week I look at the rankings. I don't look at the comments to your tweets though, because I do think that can get you into a doom scrolling. Steven, this was great. Please tell my audience where they can find you, and both on X and in the written word and all that good stuff.
I'm not calling it X. I'm on Twitter at the Steven Ruiz, and at the Ringer. You can just Google the Ringer quarterback ranking. Some Peter King articles might come up now after this week, but you'll get to them eventually.
Yeah, Peter, a legend in his own right, but certainly went after them, and that's fun. It's obviously good to have discourse and be able to talk through these things so we can walk through our assumptions and challenge them every so often. So, Steven, this was great. For everybody on here, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, give a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We thank you all for coming. So, for Steven Ruiz, for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.